I'm glad many people joined in, even though it's like 7 p.m. and talks normally are at 2 p.m. But this is because we have some special guests today. We got 3 people here. We got Jeffrey, Raoul, and Saz, 3 young game developers from all over the world. Today we will have 3 presentations or 3 talks about 3 different topics. You already saw it probably in the Facebook event. And with that being said, I will happily give the word to Jeffrey. Feel free to start your talk. It's great to have you 3 here. Thanks.
Thank you, Linus. So, hi, I assume my presentation is currently visible right now, yes. No issues currently. I think it's fine. It's not affected by me having Fantasy Star Online or anything open. So, hey everyone. I hope you're doing safe and well. I'm going to talk about how really bring a team project to life.
Jeffrey?
Wait.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Would you mind turning off your camera as your internet connection is kind of slow?
Okay. Yeah.
So this might help.
Is it better? I think I'm noticing it's better.
It's better. It's better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Guess I won't have my face cam on. Okay. Let me start again. Hey everyone. I hope you're doing safe and well. I'm going to talk about how to really bring a team project to life. As someone who's had experience with that, so kind of going from building connections to maintaining the project from beginning to release. I modeled today's presentations after early 2000s PowerPoint presentations, so I hope you have fun with that. So let's talk about some stuff. I figure I should introduce myself. I'm Jeffrey. I'm a Chinese American student who makes games. I've been working in the industry since I was 16, which was high school. Throughout late high school, my work on Unbeatable and various other projects taught me to pursue game development as a major and a profession. It's kind of like a childhood dream come true. I assume the audio works, but I do have a reel if you want to quickly see some of the stuff I've worked on. That's an example. Oh, does that work? Let me try that again. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Okay. So in today's presentation, I'm just going to share a rapid-fire amount of advice covering 3 topics. I'm separating it as X. So we're going to first talk about how to get around in the industry and where you can look for connections and potential collaborators to begin your team project. Second, we're going to talk about how to start building chemistry with these potential collaborators, getting them started in the project, right? And then last, we're going to talk about keeping that chemistry, maintaining that through a project's lifespan. I say this as someone from like a directorial or production standpoint, and more in specific, just so you know. I don't know if I had transitions for these. Oops. Anyways, so let's start with our first act. Let's talk about where we should really be looking for when it comes to connections. Yeah. So first we have our goal. We want to ride what's known as the cycle of connections. Once you start meeting people and begin showcasing yourself, that'll lead to you meeting more and more people. That's easier said than done, obviously. But you may be asking, why? Why do we want to enter this cycle? It's pretty simple, and I'm pretty sure it's a little obvious, but the more people you know, the more options you have, and having as many stones turned over as possible is going to make things a lot more easier and probably a lot more fun. Even your favorite solo creators had help from friends and acquaintances, and they've almost definitely had that built up before during the project's development. I believe Zaz's presentation actually goes into this a bit more if you're interested on stuff like auteurship. Whatever it's knowing the right person to ask for financial help, a potential collaborator, or just asking for some help, like advice, consultation, you're going to want that network built up just like on a regular basis. Just speaking from personal experience, I really can't imagine getting myself around the way I could without the people I got to work with. So great. Thanks. You know that now, but how do we really start? So there's a lot of different ways we can get started as to building connections. The first one seems a little obvious. You've definitely heard of GDC before. But while that's a fantastic convention for people in the industry to connect, it's a multitude of things. It's expensive, far away. It's also in California, which is currently a hotbed for COVID-19 right now. If you're also 21 under 21, it's not a very easy place to get yourself around too, since a lot of venues and social events tend to be fixed at bars, which you can't enter if you're under 21. But don't worry, because especially given the wake of COVID-19, there's a lot of digital events and communities that will be your best bet. Wink, wink. All presenters here today are actually a part of a community called StuDev World, which is a Discord community made for game students, right? Either you're like doesn't have to be whatever you're in a major or not, right? But any student that's currently also working on like game projects can join that too. There are some other examples of Discord communities I can come up with, which are usually the best place to get started personally. There's Wholesome Games. They're a dev community kind of centered around compassionate, like very accessible games. They actually just had like a direct yesterday where they got to like, as a community, demonstrate some upcoming games that the group's working on. There's GinQ, that's GINQ, that's a community focused towards Japanese developers, but there's actually a space for Western developers to interact with them too. r/gamedev has its own Discord, which is a lot more accessible than the subreddit itself, I think. There's also specific forums for game engines, and I think RPG Maker and Game Maker Studio, if you're using both of those engines, have the more accessible, friendly communities that you can participate via those forums. The closest thing you could get to GDC that's not GDC is an event literally called Not GDC, which happens around the same time in mid-March, and just sharing, you just can basically follow and share through the hashtag Not GDC. Also, actually, Dev Twitter as a whole is a pretty good place to start, especially if you start using some popular hashtags such as hashtag Screenshot Saturday and hashtag GameDev. I do think that you shouldn't use more than 2 to 3 hashtags per tweet. That tends to be pretty gaudy, like this presentation itself. Yeah. And also it tends to be a thing that like comes across as like kind of like botting in a sense, I feel. Another great way to get started is game jams, right? And you've probably done a few already, if you've been in game classes and the like before. But there's places such as weekly game jams, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It's every week there's like a unique theme and everyone has a week to make a game. That's just a quick way to get together with random people and try a game project together. That's on top of Game Jolt and itch.io having their own just jam support, and it's easy for anyone to set up their own jam event and join one. I can't speak from personal experience since I don't really work on game jams with people I don't know, but if you can drive well with a group, it's pretty likely that won't be the last time you'll talk with them following the game project. For the sake of time, I won't list any more from that, but you're welcome to ask us later if there's any communities surrounding the type of dev work that you like doing. And also, you don't really have to strictly look around the game industry. A lot of the best people I've gotten to work with have actually had little game dev experience and come from different fields of backgrounds. This is good. Different backgrounds mean you'll have different approaches and options you might not realize are possible. So just think about friends, acquaintances, people you talk about on a daily basis. Those may be the people that would be the most fun to work with or not. It's pretty variable, I feel. But a lot of my projects personally got their start from wanting to make something with people I hang out regularly, which was the case of A Nightmare's Trip, which was a project that had I was the only person with dev experience, and none of us had released a commercial game beforehand. So, okay, let's say we have people together, right? After a bit, you all decide you want to actually work on something together. I'm not just talking about this on technical terms, but I am asking and answering the question: how do you get your team mentally prepared for this collaboration, this project, this concept? Let's say this is under the assumption we have one right now, actually. Yeah. So team projects are a pretty social kind of experience. It's important that not only you know your team, but they know each other, which often isn't the case at the start, especially if you're the kind of person who's creating that team and everyone knows you, but they don't really know each other. I want to share some of the things I've done to help orient new groups together, starting with something you're not expecting. Um, like getting everybody together to play Fortnite. Yes, you should play Fortnite with your team or some other team-based multiplayer game, whatever works. I think any kind of media or activity that encourages team cooperation are fantastic icebreakers to get to know how everyone approaches problems together. Fortnite seems to have personally worked as an odd sticking point with several teams I've worked with. Battle Royale, it's probably because Battle Royales as a whole tend to be a good genre because they allow a lot of downtime to just casually chat in between like the regular bouts of emergent teamwork play. Fortnite in specific has a very lax party vibe aesthetic and the game itself that makes playing it feel like the equivalent of a strange happy hour session. It's how I describe it for the most part. Um, Another very important thing that I personally like doing is creating what I call mood sets. There's also mood boards, like just recommendations lists basically is what I do here. Is bringing the team's understanding on the project on an aesthetic and mechanical sense by just putting a list of all the media, like different kind of inspirations you think people should take away from. So, for example, this mood set for Project How XOR, which is an upcoming game by Skywarworks, has like a playlist, a 100-track playlist with different genres that kind of set the mood for the game's tone and its soundtrack. There's a list of games, right? And if you hover over them, they actually like shows information about the game and like its relation to our project on a mechanical sense. So this was built by like us as a team, and just get an idea of what we're all pulling from this for this project in a way. And also, this is probably something you've heard about anyways, but use Trello. Trello is good. Anything to keep your pipelines in order is pretty important, I feel. It is available to use for free on browser mobile, and you can receive months of Trello Gold by inviting new users. So probably people on your team if they haven't used it before. That actually comes with like additional plugins and minor bonus features that I particularly enjoy using. And I swear this is not an advert, but this thing has been a godsend to use at times as a producer. Okay, so that now culminates to keeping this project going. What tends to be the hard part of projects in general, I feel, but we trying to keep a good momentum and flow for the projects that like actually work, happening on a stable flow. So there's different ways we can do this. First, it's important to consider your approach as a whole to the project, just from the beginning, and that you shouldn't ever approach a collaboration with people the same way you do as another. For example, Unbeatable is a project that has like a focus on being a garnering a public following. It's a pretty significant game that I believe on a scope level is comparable to some really highly rated indie releases. But this also meant having a PR pipeline. We had to have restrictions as to how the team can openly talk about the project. And there was an important focus on, as a team, we had to all agree on business decisions, like any offers, etc. Like as a team, like before we actually made that decision. So even the director of the game can't just like make a decision without consulting others. And Imus Trip was a different story because that was like a pretty soft launch Steam game. Like we weren't too worried about how that got around, but it was our first time doing a Steam game, so we had to make the decision to actually prepare like an additional week or two of development after the game was done to be ready for Steam and like have Steam assets made for it. For Read to See Voice, which is a Skywarworks project, we had to steer our milestones around monthly Patreon posts. So our team has to kind of regularly meet up and get stuff done, like a specific goal done for the end of the month to showcase to everybody that's currently subscribed to us. But yeah, how you plan on releasing and sharing your game just really influences the amount of rate that everyone needs to complete the work at, and it means just you have to be a lot more flexible to that and accommodating. And you can definitely bolster consistent team communication through regular time meetings. Also, again, feels a little obvious, but even if there isn't too much going on, you should still have these things. Bringing people together, just chat about the project as a whole, like gather their thoughts is important, even if there's nothing apparently new that's changed from the week before. And if, in that case, it actually doubles as a good bonding time. So, if you got time to kill while you're all together, you might as well talk about various things and socialize. Like talk about how Kingdom Hearts Recoded is a good game, as an example. I would just liken this to the equivalent of a happy hour, especially at D-Cell, because after we finish our meeting topics, it usually lasts like 10 to 30 minutes. It just kind of devolves into pretty like long night of just talking about stuff and engaging as not like just the team, but just as people. So just tying back to Act 1 again, it's important to make use of just not just your connections, but the connections of your fellow collaborators. That's if they're willing to, of course, by the way. This will allow the project to just expand, gain more opportunities. You really can't do something like this by yourself if you're in a team project, right? So you can't just rely only on on the people you know and the things you know. You have to draw that in with other people. So that's worth discussing, I think, especially when your team shares your work and just like get yourself out there a lot more. Especially because for some projects like this, you need to talk about potentially talking to people with who can help fund the game, who can provide resources that your team as a whole cannot. And that's something you either already know people to approach for, or you don't know who to go to for, I think. And I'm being very broad about that too. So if you have any questions about that, let me know later. Another important thing I think that helped steer projects like a Beatable the way it did is just making sure not only everyone sees the work they're doing, right, but they actually play it themselves. It tends to be an entirely different feeling when people sit down and like play like the game and see like their work in it, their music in it, their artwork in it, they're like coding, they're like kind of programming in it. It just helps give the team an idea of where all of them are at, and it basically opens the opportunity to discuss where to go next afterwards. So on top of that, it's also just additional QA, design feedback, right? That's often crucial in early stages of game production. At DISA, we actually formalize these things as build jams. So we essentially get all of our work together in the build, compile it, and then at the end of the month, we just play it together as a team. And then that's just like our big meeting. We discuss what our goals are for the next month and the next month after that, like how we feel about the current version, if there's anything we need to change, right? This is something we're applying to Sky Hour Works pretty soon for some of our projects. And I should also note that this is actually an entirely original idea. This is a page we took from Supergiant Games, who did this themselves for several of their games. It clearly played a part in their ability to fine-tune their games' visuals, music, gameplay, that and the like, which is why we took it ourselves. And also, a thing that's often pretty easy to neglect, you need to cultivate an environment where everyone on the team can be open about how they feel about the project. And I think that's not easy to realize is the important thing. People who don't like know if they should express how they feel about something that they're working on, like often they won't say anything, right? So that's something that they've just had in the back of their mind. But you need to make that very opaquely clear that has to be a thing that's not like that's an actual expectation. Especially because when they're in it with you, you need to make sure the voice has a presence as well. I do think maintaining this openness just allows for a project to stay as like an actual collaboration, an actual thing that you connected together for, where it feels like their project as much as it feels like yours. That does mean there's like regular amounts of arguing and putting your feet down, and ultimately it may not work for larger scale projects, but I do think it will make the thing your group is working on something you truly believe in, and like make that expressed across everyone in the team. Lastly, and just like kind of on a more personal side of things, I really think just being there for people, and I mean not just your teammates, but like the people you connect with. The best kind of person you can be when it comes to being a strong collaborator, who people want to connect and work with, is someone who respects and support those people, which is just semantics, right? That's obvious, right? I really do think you should prioritize being a good friend over anything else when it comes to interacting with others in the industry. Because the industry isn't small, and people do know when the kind of different things people are doing. That's why I believe that your presence should be an optimistic and positive one that changes it for the better. That I believe is all I have time for right now. That wraps up my presentation. I have additional social media. As I mentioned before, there's a student-oriented community that you can visit our Discord actually is accessible through studev.club. If you have any additional questions, you may ask us after we're done with our presentations, or tag me on my Twitter afterwards. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much. If you look into the chat, you will see that I posted a lot of Discord links and just some websites, which Jeffrey just mentioned in his talk. I really like the aesthetic. Came back some old school visuals. That's nice. And transitions. Awesome. So next one will be Raoul.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Raoul, and now I'm going to start the presentation. Okay, yeah. So my presentation is called Persistence, Research, and Recognizing My Limits. I'll focus on kind of explaining, telling my story with development so far, and how in the past year I switched from just being a solo developer to being head of a team. So wait, let me. Okay, so hi, I'm Raoul William. I'm a Lyceum student, which is basically the equivalent of gymnasium in Germany. And I'm still at the last year of high school, so I still have to decide for university. Now I'll just show a little video that shows what I do. You'll notice that almost everything is about one game, because I pretty much spent the past 5 years working on one project. So I'll talk more about that later. In this video, everything except the 3D model is made by me. Oh, a little correction also on the last game, it was actually a game jam, so I was just a game designer for that. But yeah, I like to say a little bit about the past. So I started making games when I was 11, and I started with, wait a second. Okay, yeah. So I started with, basically I started with, Game Maker, and then soon in 2013 I started working in Unity and stuck with it since. Since the beginning, I tried to make games that were kind of platformers or puzzle games. For the most time, I tried to make the best I could. So I kept making and remaking the same games basically. The only exception was one little game I made at the beginning of 2015. But by mid 2015, I lost interest in it, because making just a clone of a breakout game wasn't really interesting to me. So that's where I really learned that I don't like making small games. So the following year, I started basically the project I'm doing now, which is effectively a Sonic-inspired 3D platformer with a lot of emphasis on music, mostly because I make music. So I started in 2016. I basically upgraded it to what is called now Patch the Ferret in mid-2016. But I couldn't really at first go much further with the project, because I spent way too much time on trying to make the ultimate physics system that will support parkour and everything else. So basically for a whole year, I didn't really progress much, which taught me that it's fundamental to dumb down all the coding problems to something that's manageable with your current skill set. So in 2017, I basically continued and restarted the project, which was restarted in 2018 over and over basically. Because of the fact that starting with a big game is basically what everyone tells not to do, because it's basically pretty much impossible. So instead, I kept, as I learned how to make games, I kept remaking what I had already made, so that I could improve it and make it something nice in a way. So the process of making a game goes on and on. So we are right now, like, the most recent thing I've been doing is like the whole rhythmic section you saw in the video, or the dynamic, or working on shaders like this dynamic grass. But yeah, I'm still working on the game and still basically on a pre-alpha, because of the fact that I'm spending a lot of time on reiterating on stuff until I'm ready. Now that I feel ready, I feel like by next year I can actually move to alpha and start going further towards the release, which might happen in 2022. So yeah, a very iterative process that basically worked as a way for me to learn how to make games, despite not making a big variety of games. And so I go to the second point of the presentation, which is research. Because of the fact I was working alone, because of the fact I live in Italy and the indie development or the game development industry is basically non-existent, I didn't really have an infrastructure or knew anyone who made games. So I basically just tried to learn by myself. So I could make music, I was interested in coding, but I was really, really bad at art. So I spent basically the first 2 years or 3 years of making fetch deferred by trying to learn how to draw or how to model in 3D. But on the bottom of these slides, you can find some of my favorite YouTube channels at the time, or my favorite videos, like the ones at the right, basically taught me everything about colors. And then another thing is that, as I mentioned before, I study in a lyceum, which is an extremely demanding kind of school, which leaves absolutely no time to work on games. In fact, I made basically everything during each summer break. Like, I only worked on the 3 months between school years. Though starting from the third year of high school, I started realizing that I could actually use most of the information I got from school for my game. Most notably, I could pay a lot of attention to art classes in order to develop an art style for the game, or learn more about architecture, or study everything I was forced to study, like maths, history, or philosophy, or Latin especially. I could use them to learn better about structuring a story for a game, or know how to code, because Latin has been basically my main resource for learning the mindset to code. I say that this trying to use school as a learning tool for making games, like the thing that summarizes it all will be what I did back in February, that I was on a trip with my schoolmates in Lisbon, which was really fortunate given that during the school trip, the lockdown started in Italy. So we were extremely lucky to start that like a couple of days before all the flights were canceled. But yeah, we spent 5 days in Lisbon, which was perfect for my game, because I could, being the fact that I make a 3D platformer, it's really important to have all the slopes and all going up and down. And Lisbon, it was perfect in terms of urban design, with all the slopes and going up and down. So basically, I spent most of my time traveling around the city. And actually, on the close to last day, I went to Sintra, which is basically what Versailles is for Paris. So in this city, there's all the stuff that were for the kings and all that. And there was a super interesting park, which proved to be extremely useful for mood boards for my game, because of the fact that this park was made with the Rococo / Baroque style, which means that everything was made to be impressive and fun to whoever was visiting it. So visiting this place felt a lot like a level for a video game. As you can see on the first picture, that's a lake, and actually what you see there, it's inside. It's the main part of a maze. Like, there was a completely dark maze that you can see on the second picture, which was actually extremely fun to go inside, and it felt just like a dungeon for a game, a dark dungeon. Or on other pictures, you can see that, like on the fifth picture, you can see there's a path. You can see there are the stairs in front of you, but there are also two others branches you can go to. So it feels a lot like designed to be entertaining. So this is extremely, to me, it felt extremely inspirational for making my game. Just because apparently there's been people who, despite games not existing, already thought about how do we make a park fun to walk in. Also, the last pictures are about the tower that is actually a super deep well, which felt incredibly well, it felt wonderful to explore, especially because the park had already closed by then, so I was basically the only person remaining there. So yeah, it was an incredible experience. And all of this is because we were going on a school trip for the last year of high school, and for history and art history. Then from research, with time, especially in 2018, I realized that I couldn't really work by myself. But before that, in order to realize that, during the long development breaks that I had during the school years, I had the opportunity to, during my free time, watch a lot of GDC talks. So there I could learn how teams work or how to manage a team. I was especially interested in management. I slowly realized how much I could benefit from working with others, or for instance, how much the game could benefit by starting a Discord community, which in fact proved to be crucial to support me in this development, because being alone, I couldn't have too much feedback, but having an active Discord community helped that on getting more varied ideas and early feedback. So starting from 2018, I started a very open development, which sure doesn't let me have much to anticipate. Everything is kind of spoiled in terms of gameplay, but it was extremely useful to keep a strong contact with the potential people interested in the project. But yeah, so with time, I realized by the end of 2018 that I really couldn't do everything by myself, especially 2D art and 3D art. And so starting from mid-2019, I slowly started to build a team. The first person to join was my sister, actually, which started to take interest in the project as I was starting to come up with characters for the game. And given I'm not much of a creative person, she was much more interested in trying to characterize them and giving them little stories. With time, this thing actually became kind of official collaboration between us two. So she's now officially the writer. And then I started looking for both a 2D artist, which I ended up finding a close friend of my sister, which proved to be extremely useful as they could very well communicate their ideas, given they are longtime friends. But then later on, I realized that for 3D art, I really needed to broaden out my scope. At first, I spent basically the whole summer of 2019 trying to find on ArtStation or Sketchfab for 3D artists that live in Italy, because of course of ease of communication, having the same culture and all that. But I really couldn't find an artist with the very specific skill set I was looking for, because as probably most people know, most of people don't really focus on toon stuff or anthropomorphic animals. Cartoon animals. So I realized that by not having any connection with other people online, just looking on ArtStation or Sketchfab didn't prove too useful. So I had to at least look for people outside Italy. At first I started looking for people in French, but I didn't find too much as well. then I just looked for anyone in the world, basically. At some point, I did find a person who seemed really interesting. It was a a student in California who was doing 3D modeling and was really into making cartoon animals. So basically, after following her for a couple of weeks on Twitter and getting to know that she seemed actually like a great person besides a great artist, I therefore just DM'd her on Twitter. Because of the fact she also already commissioned 3D models for personal, for personal use, I could already have a rough idea of what kind of contract we could stipulate. So basically, I just came to her DMs and asked her. I am basically a indie developer. I'm working on this game I've been working on this game for a few years, and I really like your work. Would you be interested in working with me if I paid you 50% more than you already charge for personal use 3D models? I'm gonna commission you 8 models, and I'm looking for working with you for about 6 months. This was basically the start of the conversation. She agreed. We later signed an NDA, went on with making a contract, and now we've been working together. The main idea about making a contract and all was the fact that I really wanted to, coming from being a solo developer working on an extremely personal project, I really wanted to play safe at first, keep control on the project, keep the creative control, and then later lose the various elements. So starting with a very precise like contract, and then later on developing it into more of a collaboration. Something similar, I thought something similar would have happened with the level designer, but that ended up being more correlated with the community instead. In fact, because of a really dumb tweet post, like the community was just making memes on the channel, on the art channel, that seemed like a good way to kind of spam my server on my Discord, on my Twitter. So I just tweeted a screenshot, and actually something like 4 or 5 people joined. And among these, there was a person who had already seen my game in an online game expo about indie games and Sonic fan games. So he's someone who spent time making Sonic fan levels, which was pretty much exactly the kind of skill set that I was looking for, given the fact that I'm working on a game heavily inspired by Sonic. So while I was looking at his stuff and I was really amazed by how wonderful everything looked, he actually DM'd me right after joining my server, asking me if he could work with me. So this relationship is now going on like more of a collaboration. I still signed an NDA and we're still working on a contract at some point, given the fact that I really want to keep the lead of the project. But this is going to be much more of a collaboration from the start. And also an overall much deeper relationship, given the fact we really get on really well. Most of this was actually like keeping such a vertical structure for the team has been possible mostly for one reason. Besides the fact that I really wanted to do it like this, it was possible mostly because I spent 2-3 years just trying to learn how to make art in 3D art. And while I never got good at it, looking at all those tutorials and trying to learn from them proved extremely useful for later talking with artists. Because while I'm terrible at doing stuff, it proved extremely useful for knowing all the struggles that come with making 3D art. Or I could actually just point out what the 3D artist had to do. For instance, while starting with the 3D model, I could immediately tell if she was taking a good approach for topology, if that would have worked good with the animation style. Or for the 3D model of the main character, we immediately started talking about the technique to move the eyes, because I know that in cartoon characters, it's extremely hard to move the eyes. And so I'm thinking of having an approach like the Mickey Mouse ears on Castle of Illusion, of the Mickey Mouse game on the Wii. Or this kind of stuff proved really useful, so that I could still keep a lot of control on the art department because of the fact that I did dabble on those fields. So the first results, like from late 2019, are basically this. The one on the left is the work the 2D artist has done. And then just a few months later, before the 2D artist had finished with all the character sheets, with all the reference sheets, the 3D artist immediately started the fact that the writer was very much involved as well. She could immediately communicate with me or the writer and know if the mood for the character was right. Something similar for another character. So the takeaway, one of the takeaways would be that while I couldn't work on the game because I'm on the last year of the Lyceum, because of all the research I had done in the past, I could build a team instead and have someone to kind of work for me while I can only manage. And now that summer comes again, I can implement all the 3D models and all the art and start working on the rest of the game. Yeah, this is pretty much all. This is like the final design of the character, which I recently commissioned to the artist. This as well was a really long iteration because I pretty much told her everything to do. Despite her being an amazing artist, I really wanted to have a strong control on it so that the character design could be exactly like I wanted. So yeah, this is pretty much the talk for now. Well, yeah, these are my links and all the resources, I guess. But yeah. So yeah, for sure, managing a vertical team is risky, but I feel like it's possible if done this way.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. I already posted the link to Fetch the Ferret in the chat. Yeah. Thank you very much for your talk. So the next and last talk will be by Saz. Hi.
Hey. Let me get my stuff screen shared real quick. Does that look good?
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
All right, cool. So, yeah, my talk is called You Don't Have to Do This Alone, and it's about auteurship in game development and building healthy teams to make your projects the best they can be. So, hi, I'm Zaz, and I am a hobbyist game developer and a recent college graduate. I have a degree in computer science. I've been making games since late high school, and I'm almost entirely self-taught. And I've had experiences working on games in a variety of roles, but my biggest passions are for programming and design. I don't really have a reel put together, so I just kind of like slapped some GIFs of stuff that I've worked on this slide. But these are examples of some games that mostly from stuff that I've spearheaded myself. A lot of my work is done for 2D games, but I also have I have experience working on 3D and VR stuff from internships that I've gotten to be a part of. And one of the biggest things I enjoy in game development is designing and programming fun and functional UI. I just find that like a super fun process to do. So going more in depth with some of the stuff I'm working on, my current projects include Ricochet Ranch, which is a 2D couch multiplayer shoot 'em up, where your bullets ricochet endlessly off walls and you got to reload by catching them. I'm doing UI design and UI programming for World of Illusions, which is a platformer with focus on gun customization. And my main goal there is I'm making a cutscene engine and editor that's going to be used both here and for future projects. And I'm also going to be starting work on later this summer, a roguelike with Jeff, who you heard talk earlier, called Skies Abound. So previous projects I've worked on, I did programming and design on a game called Tempo City, which was like a music puzzle game. I made a game called Ghost Punk Zero entirely solo during college as partially as a school assignment, and I plan on turning that into something bigger later down the line. I did a game called Bladebreaker Sword Taker with a handful of artist friends for the Game Makers Toolkit Jam in 2019. And I had Reaper Story is a monster collection RPG that I started to work on last Devtober, and kind of cycle through it. I'm planning on cycling through it every October and continuing work on it until it's done. So why are we here? What's this all about? This talk basically represents some information and encouragement I wish I had when I started developing games back in high school. When I first started out, I was very determined to do everything on my own. I had these lofty ideas for my initial projects and was incredibly passionate about them, which led me to become a little too attached to them. And my attachment to these ideas led me to feel like I needed to be the sole developer on these games for a multitude of reasons. And this mindset stuck with me for a long time, even carrying over to my work on multiple future projects. Even with such lofty aspirations for someone just starting out, I still saw the process as viable because of the development history of some of my biggest inspirations. What? There, oh my word. One moment, sorry. So when I was 12, I played Cave Story for the first time through its DSi port, and it instantly became one of my favorite games of all time. Almost immediately after I finished my first playthrough, I started another, and over the course of about 2 years, I played through the game maybe 30 times. I have fond memories of spending long cross-country road trips racing my brother to see who could get through the game as many times as possible in just one sitting. I was so enamored by the game back then, and finding out later in life that something that meant that much to me was the work of just one person as a hobby project blew my mind, and was what initially kickstarted me to start teaching myself how to program. Later in life, I played Undertale, which also acted as a major source of inspiration for me, and was what inevitably inspired me to get more serious about making games. There's a handful of factors that led these specific games to have this impact on me. Firstly, both of them had a huge focus on stories and characters whose themes and arcs meant something to me. And they also both felt very personal to their creators in a way that most other games that I had played previously just weren't. And most impactful for how I would decide to start my stride into the world of game development, both were lauded for being made by a single developer. So why would you want to solo dev like ever? Game development is a long and hard process, and one that feels meant for a team. Creating a good game requires skills in a lot of areas as well as a lot of time. And when you've decided to go the route of a solo developer, you're often taking on the work and time that's usually split up among an entire team. This often causes the work done by solo developers to take much longer than it would for if you had done it with a group instead. For example, Cave Story took 5 years to complete, which is a long period of time for any kind of project. But despite the great amount of effort required, there's still obviously a number of reasons why one might want to solo develop. And one of the biggest reasons is to develop alone is to have full creative control of your project. This mindset is often a result of being the originator of a project's idea. If a project is special to you, it makes sense to want it to turn out exactly like it is in your head. And there's an understandable fear that introducing other people to the project could result in your original vision for it being muddied, as the input and work of others can potentially cause the course of the project to stray from the path you might have intended without strict management. It's still possible for a single creative vision to preside over the work of an entire team, but the strict control that can can lead to some other issues. There are a variety of game designers and directors who self-identify as or are labeled as auteurs in their field. Auteurship describes the idea that a creative work's entire vision is shaped by one person who strictly manages multiple aspects of its production in order to reach that vision. The term was originally penned to describe similar roles in the film industry, but the ideas of it are able to be applied to most artistic mediums. Today, in the realm of Western game development, there are many designers who are labeled as auteurs who seem to have a noticeable impact on a project's creative direction and reception. There's a romanticism to the cohesive sense of identity auteurship implies. Having a noticeable creative identity suggests a strong sense of creative self-awareness and control of your team. Games made with auteurs involved are often marketed around what makes the auteur's creative vision unique, and many modern games are advertised with the name of their lead directors front and center in some of their marketing. For example, the PS4 game Death Stranding was advertised with the tagline, a Hideo Kojima game. And the studio developing it, Kojima Productions, is even named after its director, further emphasizing the role he plays. So while the idea of auteurship has its benefits, there's many negative aspects that somewhat outweigh the good. The larger a team is, the more strict auteur can hurt it. The strong grip on creative control from a single person auteurship requires can quickly stifle the creativity of the individuals involved. And the inclusion and promotion of an auteur can lead the individual contributions made by members on the team to be devalued. Important elements of a game such as the script, art, and music might be belittled or wrongfully attributed to the designer that is labeled as the auteur. These issues are largely due to lack of transparency in the field of game development. Many of the consumers of a game might notice big names like Todd Howard attached to a project and assume its quality from there based on past works associated with that name, without knowing whether or not the people who make some of the super important aspects of previous games special are still involved. The desire to have strong creative control, but wanting to avoid some of these issues that auteurship can bring is a contributing factor in why some choose to solo develop. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be a solo developer. If it's the approach you feel is right for you, for your project, and you feel like you have what it takes to pull it off, then by all means go forward with it. The advice I want to give more than anything through this talk is that working with a team doesn't have to mean giving up on your original vision, and that opening up discussion on the creative aspects of your project can be incredibly beneficial to the end result. One of the most helpful aspects of working in a team is that your team members are able to have strengths where you may have weaknesses. So when I first started getting super serious about game development in college, I had this idea in my head that through my free time, I'd be able to learn and develop the skills I was lacking to match my ambition through independent learning and free time. I went into college knowing a little about code, a very little about art, and almost nothing in my skill set relating to producing music, creating models, managing, or producing a project. And I thought that over the course of 4 years, I'd be able to get myself ready to be the super awesome solo developer I was supposed to be. That didn't happen. I came out of college pretty competent at programming, halfway decent at art, maybe a little okay at managing a project, but I still didn't have a lot of experience in the other facets game development involves. My college experience as a computer science major only really prepared me for the programming side of things, and between game projects and classwork, I found myself too busy to make substantial progress preparing myself to fill roles outside of programming or design. While I might have initially felt like I had failed, I had come to a different realization during this time about the nature of game development. It's more than okay to ask for help. Working with a team allows you to create a stronger end result than would otherwise be the case. If you're not the best at art, bringing an artist on your team will obviously help immensely, and the same goes for all the other aspects of production. Even beyond just the quality of the end result, there's a number of reasons why one might consider branching out into a full team. While it's understandable to be attached to your ideas, it's always important to get feedback. It's easy to become biased towards your project if you're already attached to it, which can lead you to not realize or deny flaws in your plan. Having a team gives you a network of less biased feedback on your ideas, as well as useful input on where else you can shift a project's direction. Brainstorming with a group is one of the healthiest and most beneficial things you can do for a creative project, and allows for everyone involved to get their ideas considered. Working with a team can also do a great job at boosting and maintaining morale, because if you're working with people you love to work with, it's only natural you'll get more work done and enjoy doing it. So some closing thoughts. If you've been struggling on your journey as a developer, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Even beyond forming teams, the game dev community is one that is very good at helping newcomers find their footing, either through teaching resources or direct instruction through programming help forums and the like. As Jeff mentioned in his talk, there's tons of online communities and resources available, not only to create new connections, but also to get guidance on where you should be heading next on your game dev journey. Failure to make it work out by yourself doesn't mean failure as a developer. Game development is incredibly difficult, and there are people willing to help you. But just because you feel like you have to do things with a group doesn't make you any less important or skilled as a developer. Working in a team can serve to help make your good project idea into a great one. Sharing your ideas with others allows for incredibly valuable feedback, as well as input that has the potential to lead to a much better end result. So thank you for listening. I hope you, I realized that I rushed way more than I did even when practicing, so sorry that this wrapped up pretty quick. But if you want to follow my work, you can find me on Zaz Stuff on Twitter, and take care.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the last presentation. Yeah, we already had like a few points. I wrote down some key points which I found really interesting, and I wanted to share them with you. So first of all, I got to know all of the speakers we get today on Twitter. So Twitter is a good community for game devs, as Jeff already said in his talk. There are like many people there talking to each other, sharing their work. There was yesterday the Pitch Your Game hashtag going through Twitter, through Twitter, and many people were sharing the games. As Sas said, it's perfectly fine to reach out for help. It's nice to just go around, even maybe university, and ask people for advice or just for help on a certain game. You may find some people, as I already did at our university, for the project I'm currently working on. But there are also like a ton of Discord communities. Unity has their own Discord community and other stuff. And what I found really interesting, what Raoul mentioned, was that you can look for inspiration in the real world, which is like really a key point. Just going through the world with your open eyes and just look for something which may inspire you for a new game. And last but not least was the fact that learning different skill sets is really important when it comes to talking to your team. I mean, you need to know about art to talk to an artist in a certain way, or at least it helps you to do that. So these were kind of my key takeaways from today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them, put them in a chat or speak up. Or if you just want to talk about something, feel free to do so. This is the first time we now had students here, or international students, talking about their work. And if you have any feedback concerning this talk, feel free to hit me up afterwards. Yeah, are there any questions or any stuff you want to talk about? Does not seem like it. So, yeah.
Not currently, no.
No. So you probably mentioned already a lot of stuff. Otherwise, if you have questions afterwards, I already posted the link to the StuDev Discord. It's like the first Discord in a chat. You can also go there and ask afterwards or chat about the games our speakers are currently working on. So do you guys have any last words you want? Something you want to say?
Oh, somebody asked you a question, Linus.
Oh. Linus, how did you meet these guys and bring them into the channel? Well, Twitter. That's basically actually it. I just wrote a tweet out looking for people who might want to talk about certain stuff. And Jeffrey hit me up. He tweeted at me, and then we went into a little talk, and we talked about, okay, what can we do? Maybe something student related, just to share your thoughts all over the world and share your progress and stuff like that. And so we came up with this talk idea, and then Jeffrey was like, "Hey, what about Sas and Raoul? Can we talk to them?" And then yeah, that's why are we here.
Pretty
Yep,
much,
that's
yeah.
basically how it came together.
I really,
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, I would mention that StuDev World actually came together because we were talking as a group because of that.
Yeah, you can speak up. Yeah. Yeah, Rebecca. If you have the mic on.
I haven't actually personally mentioned, about contracts and NDAs myself. That's something I did overlook, but it's a huge part of the projects I've worked on too. Generally, I have personally avoid making contracts till probably towards the end of production, which is not very. It depends on the people you're working with. That's ideally not a good thing, but for us, it works best because by the end we have a better idea of what we want when the game is done. Like what everyone in the team wants to get out of it when it's done is how I feel about it. Which is why we don't actually have contracts entirely formalized for Skyhour Works projects currently.
Oh, I just understood the question now. I didn't get it at first. Yeah, I could explain better. Like, the main point is that I was really scared about working with other people at first. So for the entirety of the project, I had.
Sorry, Rebecca, your mic is not working. Indeed.
Oh
my
yeah.
mouse is not
Okay.
working.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No. Rebecca's mic is not working.
Yeah.
Your mic is fine. We can hear you okay. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't get what happened.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I guess I cool.
Yeah.
Her mic. Their mic.
Yeah. But feel free to talk, and I will chat with Rebecca. Feel free to finish what you wanted to say. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm kinda reading them late, so I'm kinda getting the thing late. But yeah, the main thing is that I was really afraid of working with others, being used to working or doing everything by myself for basically my entire teen years. But I really noticed that it was inhumane to just do everything by myself. It didn't make sense to just work on something I'm not so great at and have to put aside music or game design just because I really had to draw. In fact, I basically only drew for the game, nothing else. And so I realized that I needed to work with other people. With time, once I met the 3D artist, I realized that I really had to have this 3D artist and be working with her for quite some time. I couldn't just commission her a model and do it in a kind of unprofessional way, to say. So yeah, I did try to contact her and talk about it with her because I still wanted to keep the lead about the project because I was really afraid of doing something wrong and possibly messing up something. So I really felt like, would you be comfortable with signing an NDA so we can both be sure that I must pay you everything and you must not show something about this game or something like that?
That's more so a contract though. NDAs is very much like you're not allowed to disclose specific details about either a contract or like a general information. So being under NDA for like something that you're like privy to knowing but you can't tell to people. What you explains a bit more like just a traditional contract of promising you'll pay someone, something like that in due time.
I did start with that without NDA, and then we finally started talking in specifics about all the timing and everything that was supposed to happen during the contract. So like I signed NDA before discussing about everything because I would have had to explain her the story, explain her the scope about the game, and basically everything. So I was scared that like I could explain you, but if I told her that like there's this kind of thing, I will keep all the rights on the models, and will that be okay? There were kind of some things I had to talk with her that couldn't be done without an NDA, in my opinion. And so yeah, I had to do 2 contracts, had to sign them both. So that was really useful. And now that we have such a clear paper that says how our relationship works, we can just lose it up with time. We don't have to change the contract and make it more restrictive. We can only make it more open with time, which in my opinion is quite useful because it makes like the relationship more and more natural with time. Like it starts very professional, then it becomes more informal, where with time we are becoming friends. So that's very useful in my opinion. It's still something that probably doesn't work for most of people, but I think that can be useful for someone who's working on a very personal project.
I would agree with Rebecca that NDAs tend to be kind of useless for indie games, although it's worth noting, especially if you feel like and this is something you may or may not feel for a project, or you may feel that what you're doing for a project is something you don't want other people to see and take away from you while you're working on it, right? Which I think is also definitely what Raoul is currently explaining, right? That kind of fear is purely the reason an NDA exists in the first place, and it's something that I think we don't really exactly have down and unbeatable, but we've definitely talked as a team that there are things we don't want to talk about. There are things we are restricted from saying openly as a team, just like a general mutual agreement, nothing down on paper. But it is pretty essential to not explicitly talk about everything on the game if people don't feel comfortable about that, especially if it's something that you want to withhold till the game is done necessarily, which in our case for that project, it's primarily story. Story-based story and like various aspects of the gameplay that haven't been revealed yet.
Yeah, Rebecca, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on this or your knowledge on this. I think it's also really important, like the last sentence you mentioned, that also when sharing an idea, sometimes people are scared that others will steal their idea, but a lot of ideas are not unique, and your personal spin on the execution is what matters.
Could I add a thing, actually? I am aware that like I wasn't really afraid of having my idea stolen, but at the time 18 years old student and working with a 22 years old person, I really just wanted to feel like I'm professional, and if this game happens to be grow bigger in the future, I don't want to have problems because of the fact that I was not professional enough in the past. So I really just wanted to be, I wanted to work as if I was bigger. I'm not. I really do know I'm not. I really do know I'm just a student. But I know that that can't harm in the end. So I much prefer being more sure about it than underdo it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Are there any more thoughts from? Yeah, not meaning to critique you, by the way. I think you approach it very professionally.
Don't worry. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning it, though. Really, really nice. It's always nice to share information and share knowledge about stuff.
Yeah, I mean we're students, much like you guys, so like it's great to learn from you all as well as we're sharing stuff for you guys today. That's how I feel.
So I'm already pretty happy how this turned out, since it's something new, something which we have not done before, which is quite nice. Anyone from you got funding for your projects, like official money or so? A question by Michael.
I don't know about everyone else right now, but I can say in the case of most of my projects currently, no. We are currently actively seeking funding. So I can explain a bit more about what that process has been like thus far, but I can't go into the specifics for reasons that are basically an unofficial NDA. I can mention that for one of my projects I mentioned, which is Read to See Voice, that actually did had a family member provide some funding for that. That's roughly, it's not a lot, but it's enough for the game to get released on Steam, for me to be able to cover fees for additional like kind of contracting work and the like, and also purchasing additional software plugins for the project.
Zaz, you have something to say?
Yeah, so all the projects that I've like worked on recently have all been just like they have had a budget of nothing. But my internship work on a handful of projects has all been for like funded stuff with like actual funding. Just what
Right.
I was gonna add.
I wonder, with official money, you mean like statal funding, or
It sounds
just...
it sounds like Michael's referring to either like funding from a publisher or an
Oh,
investor.
okay.
In which case that's quite a very ubiquitous thing in the industry, especially because indie publishing is a very like common thing that's trying to happen nowadays. As I can say with Unbeatable, that's like our main focus right now is to work on acquiring indie publishing ourselves. If you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer. Permitted, it's not something I can't talk about.
But yeah,
Oh yeah, there's also government funds.
yeah. That's probably where our countries shows the most differences. I noticed that in Bavaria, there's a lot of funding. In Italy, there's nothing at all, but they just started last week, and I've been studying a lot about it, which is exactly like it works in France. So it's really interesting. I'm surely studying on that.
I don't know if America has anything like that actually.
I don't think
probably
so.
doesn't. It's
I
America.
know that
I don't know.
UK,
I don't know what to
Denmark,
expect.
Poland, and all that, but not US and Canada. Canada with the media thing.
Australia. I know Australia used to had something like that too. For I know projects like Hand of Fate were funded that way.
So Rebecca just said Germany has a nation. Germany has a nationwide program. A lot of film funds internationally have included games, and there's a Creative Europe, which is open to all European countries. And I already posted the link to Games Bavaria, which you already mentioned, that Bavaria got also quite nice funding. Actually, there's also an event from Berlin Games Week going on until next week, a deadline to submit a game. If anyone is just working on something, I don't know. might be interesting. And also the talks are featured there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I need to caught up with school. I already have the final test in a few weeks, in a couple of weeks.
Yes, good luck.
Oh
yeah.
Yeah, you're still in school, right? I've been done for a few weeks.
I mean, actually, this situation has helped me a ton. Thanks to this COVID situation, I was able to code a lot of stuff.
Also, if you're a dev from a minority group, there are often programs to get you some extra funds or help you visit events. And this is especially true for GDC. I think there were like many scholarships.
Yeah, I got emails on the regular from our program about GDC programs. They specifically have a lot of things for in America for like persons of color, people of different like regions. I think they have a specific program for LGBTQ people as well, right? Like a deal of us, right? And that program, like all of that lets you like get into like some like interesting kind of GDC program. I feel a tad mixed about it because basically they railroad you for a lot of different courses. They have like a lot of different set up like tables and stuff that they make like manually set up for you. And especially as somebody who had different goals going to GDC, I didn't really want to apply for that when I wanted to go this year. Because I wanted to go to GDC for different reasons. I wanted to be able to actually socialize with people there, which I mentioned ended up apparently being pretty difficult. There were like I was invited to several places and I just couldn't actually go there because it's for 21 plus people. Which is the specific reason why I mentioned that. And I got the impression pretty quickly that GDC is not a very approachable event for students outside of those programs. But as someone who does game development, like game projects outside of like my student work as a game design student, I was a little disappointed in that. I think is how I feel about it. I would say GDC is a pretty significant event to go to, but it's really not a catch-all. Most of my connections at conventions have actually been at MagFest, which is more of like a general music game event kind of thing, if nothing else. Less of a actual like formal game development kind of convention, but because they have an indie showcase there's a lot of indie devs around as well, and just indie devs in general who love hanging at that event because it's a pretty nice party place, honestly. Like just like any kind of convention really will do. I mean, I stress that you don't really need to approach just like game development by people in the game industry. Like you really could just it's really a good idea to think about like outside the box and work with people who have different backgrounds. Like and I admitted this, but I remember, and as an example, Outer Wilds, the composer of the game hadn't previously worked on a game before, especially like more so digital audio, right? I think that might be wrong, so don't hold me on that one last bit. But but his work on the game for what is basically his first time was pretty outstanding, and his style of music was partially like the huge like influence of that game concept as a whole, I feel.
Also, what is interesting concerning events, what I just want to mention is, for example, also like groups like the volunteer experience, in which many of our students are in, which will just help you to either get a place for volunteering at a conference, which is a nice thing to do if you would like to meet other people or meet fellow game devs, and it's also just a really, really nice community. Also, some of our speakers, which will come next month and the months afterwards, are actually a part of the volunteer experience. So this is definitely a nice thing to be part of. But yeah, it is also COVID-19 right now, so no conferences, no events. Okay, Patrick is writing.
Oh yeah. Read. Yeah,
I will just read the chat. You guys are doing so much by yourself. Don't you think it's good to outsource all the law, contract, and tech stuff to a tax consultant? I've heard a lot of startups, but not in the games industry, doing that.
I'm going to say on a pension that I hope we get funding from Beatable specifically, because any amount of budget that I personally would be given for like software and hardware, I'm actually just going to put that towards getting ourselves a tax consultant, because that stuff flies over my head. As a freelancer, I've had regular panics, especially having the Nightmares trip on Steam for a few months. I had to I genuinely like I had to like kind of learn and understand a lot about how Steam handled taxes and the like, and I still don't know how they were going to handle it. I got really worried because of the amount of revenue the game made at the end of the year, and didn't know if they were going to send me a form or not. I haven't been sent anything yet. D-Cell, despite like I wasn't too sure what to do with D-Cell, because we actually sold merch for Unbeatable at MagFest, which is literally the first week of this year, and I didn't know like whatever or not we need to account our expenses or stuff like that for the event, like expenses and profits for the event for 2019 or something like that, because basically we were doing all that work up to the end of 2019, but I guess not. So I don't know, that's just kind of in the limbo. The most I can say though is it's good to outsource all of that stuff if possible. On laws and contracts in specific, that's where I think connections actually play into a bigger key, because you're bound to actually know someone. Like, I wouldn't say everyone would, but knowing somebody who's a lawyer isn't actually particularly difficult in my experience, especially with my family. So you'll be able to find someone who, if they're willing to, they can just go to you, and you can just go to them and share what you have, ask if they think it's an okay deal, it has what you want in it, something like that. People in our dev team from Beatable will have pretty strong experience with that, which is why we got that actually covered. But tax stuff we don't, because you don't really understand it, especially because America's tax system is kind of a hell, to put it mildly. Yeah.
In my case, it's a bit odd as always, and my sister is doing law, so I could ask her if she was actually studying for this thing in particular. So I could ask her if at least the outline was correct. I know it's not like done by a lawyer, but at least I knew that the most obvious errors weren't done. Though I am looking for something like that in the near future. I really want to have that sorted out by 2021 for my project. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the upcoming saddle funding for indie projects, because I feel like if I at least try to access saddle funding, I will have to learn interface with what goes with taxes and everything. So I could at least have some direction on where to learn, just because I'm trying to enter a fund, to get a fund. So, but for sure, I will have to get that sorted out by beginning of 2021.
Yeah, no, that's a given for me too. So.
But yeah, because of the fact
year,
that the project is personal, I really try to save on everything and just invest on what I'm that sure about, So I'm still waiting on that.
So Rebecca says, even if you don't have a lawyer or for everything, the number one rule is never sign a contract with an investor or publisher without having a lawyer read it first, preferably one that knows the games industry. Get a lawyer, it will be worth it. And this is especially
Yeah.
to get to know a lawyer in the games industry. You could, for example, ask fellow game developers or other companies, or go to a meetup in a local area, and you will find
I
some.
know. I know family who have helped game companies in the past. Probably not specifically on a game type contract, but like I know people to approach for something like that as an example. I agree on that, especially. I feel Rebecca, like just even if like even though our team has like law experience, right? It never hurts to have more people look at it, especially if they already do this kind of stuff like for a living, basically. That's how I feel.
I'm not looking for either a publisher or funding, unless I get this kind of funding, but I'm not really looking for it too much. So fortunately, I don't have to worry about that for yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm not looking for investors.
Mm-hmm.
So we got another now. I've seen too many people caught in terrible contracts. So this is something I'm very passionate about. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Yeah, I can say I have similar experience too. I recently had an internship that did not have a contract signed, and that was a problem. I had to basically push him to make some kind of agreeable terms that was at least acceptable. Way later into the thing through email, which was it can be officiated as like actually legal binding, but it was really messy. So especially after that, especially knowing people on some of the teams I worked with who have been burnt out from poor contracts and just really bad management. Like I think that's kind of the reason why I angled my project, my presentation the way it did, because I think if the people who ran these projects manage teams less like workers and more like people, right? I mean, like that I think that just makes a bigger difference, and it makes everything on both ends a lot more like I think I can't think of the specific word, but just like it makes things on both ends not sketchy and like not uncomfortable and not like somebody's going to undercut you, right?